Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I'm delighted to be joined by Bram de Jager, MVP Delaware, Netherlands, who will be talking to you today about keep control of your data with Azure Information Protection and Azure Conditional Access. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC20. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit SharePointEurope.com and click the content link at the top. Next week, 25th to 29th of May 2020, join us for a week of free Azure learning online from Microsoft, MVPs, and industry experts. See SharePointEurope.com/Azure-week. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have in the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Bram de Jager. Hello, Bram.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bram de Jager. I'm saying good afternoon, but it might be a good day, a good morning, or maybe good evening, depending on where you are. But happy you're here from that perspective. Like I said, my name is Bram de Jager. I'm a lead architect for Delaware. We're a global company, but I'm based here in the Netherlands, which is in the European time zone. So that's why I was referring to good afternoon. I'm a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional and a Microsoft Certified Master for the SharePoint space. At least there's still a couple of them around, so I'm happy to be one of them at least. So today I'll be talking for the upcoming hour. We got until 4, and let's see how far we can make it. If we don't get up to the hour, that's fine. Then I'll give you back some time at least. But I'll be talking about Azure Information Protection and Azure Conditional Access, or actually, this has been changed. So I should be referring to, and now my slide needs to start changing. Let's see, there we go. Actually, it should change to keeping control of your data with Microsoft Information Protection. The space is changing, and it's changing rapidly, and this is now moving from where it initially started off with, or actually it started off with on-premises Azure Rights Management Server back in the days. And with the whole move from on-premises to the cloud, this changed into Azure Information Protection, which was actually the product which evolved itself from Rights Management Server. And then it evolved even more, and it nowadays is better known as Microsoft Information Protection. So happy you're here, and let's get started. Let's start with the fun. So the basics, information protection. And the slide deck is from last year. I updated a bit, as in last year, ESPC last year, but I'll basically talk you over with the last updates, of course. The whole kind of taking a step back and showing the whole security platform, which there is consisting of multiple aspects. And today we're talking about information protection, which you can see here in the middle. But the key thing, it all starts with identity and access management, of course. Identity and access management is about you being an identity and you being able to authenticate as an identity, which from normal user perspective, that means a user account, and that has a username and a password most of the times, or an email address, or UPN, user principal name from that perspective. And with that, we can identify ourselves. And the next step is, once we get into the platform, that allows us to start managing our access and start managing our authorizations and what am I allowed to access and what I'm not allowed to access. So that's all being bound within that bucket, which is identity and access management. Information protection is the next one. That's the topic of today. Threat protection is more about managing the threats which are currently out there. So thinking about phishing attacks, thinking about identity theft, thinking about antivirus, or basically viruses, and then having the proper ways of controlling that by using antivirus products or solutions, of course. And security management is more targeted towards, well, authorizations, what I already mentioned, and other bits and pieces. So today, information protection. What's driving all of this? The key thing is we're living in a world which is kind of everywhere today. So our data is everywhere. It's not just on our laptops, or not just on our phone, or it's not just in our data center, or it's not actually just in the cloud. It's kind of, it moves all the time, constantly. That allows us to be productive, but it also has a downside because we now need to start managing all those different locations, of course. And then thinking about devices, and we have to control all sorts of devices. It's not only that laptop which I started off with, but it's also about the mobile devices where the data basically eventually gets stored or gets opened temporarily. It's about managing your laptops. It's about managing actually the web browser, because why don't we just open up our work data in a public internet cafe somewhere in a completely different country? We should be productive. So we should have that capability of accessing our data anytime, everywhere, any place. But that comes with a downside, because that's also a big worry, because you kind of have to start thinking about, where is my data? Where's my sensitive data? Because it's not only about where's the whole of my data, but the key thing here is where's my sensitive data? We're talking about the data which is sensitive to, maybe it's secret, maybe it's confidential, maybe it consists something about a merger between your company and another company, and that's something you don't want to publicly share, at least not at the start when all of those conversations are happening. You want to keep that to a limited set of people, and that limited set of people is even smaller than the whole of your company, of course. That's just a small set of probably upper management at that point. And you want to make sure that that keeps with those people and doesn't, well, you want to prevent the data leakage around that particular topic. The things you need to start consisting is, what you are thinking about is, how do you want to cope with data which travels? So somebody which uses a laptop or a tablet, for instance, and jumps onto the plane and get into another country, how do you make sure that that data is still safe? Or what do you actually use? What kind of solutions can you use to make sure that the data is safe? So these are questions you want to start thinking about. And that basically drives a lot of worries which are there with your security officer, with your CIO, with people which are thinking, how do we keep in control of our data? And if you start looking at these numbers, 80% of your employees use non-approved SaaS apps, the top one. Think about this one. This is shadow IT. That's a common term which we all are way more aware of probably. Think about, we're using the Microsoft Cloud as our corporate way of storing our data, and then people start using Dropbox or Box or Google Docs or any other type of solution which is out there, because it's just easy. You know it because of your personal life, for instance, and that's why you start using that one, because you need to share that file. And it's about sharing the file. It's not, you need to do your job. It's not about choosing the solution at that point. And that's how shadow IT pops up. And actually, when we start looking, it's 80%. That's almost everybody in the company. Another thing is, if looking at the third one, 88% of the organizations no longer have confidence to detect and prevent the loss of sensitive data. Ouch. That means is, you're not in control, or at least you think you're not in control. And you need to start looking at, how do I apply the proper governance? How do I apply the proper compliance? Which controls do I get in place to start managing this? And probably all of you are aware that you've accidentally sent some sensitive information to the wrong person. You start typing an email, and in the to line, you type the particular first name of the person, and because Outlook does that, it just pops up the initial person. You send out the email, and a second after you send out the email, you're thinking, ooh, that was not the right Rob or Peter or whoever, Shane, let's take the example of you. That was not the right Shane which I want to send out. That was a different Shane at a different company. And before you knew it, you kind of send out that sensitive attachment, that Word file which contains information which shouldn't have sent out to other people which they don't belong to. So this is where the Microsoft Information Protection pops in. It's about discover, classify, protect, and monitor. Discover, the first step all the way to the left, is about where is my data? How do I actually know what data I have? You need some kind of a solution which starts looking at the data and start interpreting the data. Second, classify. Think about there's somewhere probably within the company a policy around sensitive data. It's about, you got personal data, public data, maybe business data or general data, confidential data, highly confidential or secret data. Think about a policy like that. It's probably somewhere out there, but most of the companies have such a policy, but they just have it as a piece of paper. And they expect that the employee is actually living up to it, that they are aware of the policy and that they are making sure that when they're doing their job, that they are compliant with the policy. But you actually don't know. So the way to get that in place is actually start changing that paper-based policy into a pragmatic solution, and then bringing it all the way up to the user, to the employee, allowing them to actually start applying a label. And this is where you change from that piece of paper, which outlines the classification, and you make it a label which you can actually physically apply to a document. That's the classification piece here. And then protection, the third one. The protection is key. Why is it key? Because between somewhere probably 5 or 10% max of all your data within your company is actually bound to the highly confidential part, the secret part, the most precious piece which you don't want to send out to somebody who shouldn't be having that data. So protection should be applied to actually that 5 to 10% of your data. That's where the biggest win is. That's where people are afraid of, that you're going to share out that data, and you need to start applying protection on that data and making sure you have the proper authorizations in place, allowing you to block other people from opening it once it's in their hands. And monitoring is the last piece, and that's actually interesting because that's currently still moving, let's put it that way, but it's getting more attention in the last couple of months, because monitoring is about how much data is there actually in your cloud environment or in on-premises, and how much of that data is currently being labeled and being classified, and how much of that data is actually being protected. And if you want to start tracking your data, that's something which is upcoming somewhere in the future, because it's not being completely moved over or migrated over to the new Microsoft Information Protection piece. It's still in Azure Information Protection. But eventually what will happen is you can actually monitor on a document level if that document is being opened and by whom. And that's interesting. But secondly, what's interesting is you can actually start revoking your authorizations from a remote location. That's where it really gets interesting. But it's a small amount of business or a small amount of companies which are actually looking at that piece of functionality. And the key thing, all of these 4 concepts, which are applicable to information protection, need to be applied on all of your devices, all of your apps, if applicable, if possible, of course, in all of your cloud services, and all on your on-premises locations. So basically, this is not somewhere on some small amount of data. You want to control it completely everywhere over the whole stack. Microsoft Information Protection: discover, classify, protect, if applicable, for the 5 to 10%, and start monitoring, and basically repeat the whole cycle again. And this is where you slowly increase and you start benefiting the solution and making sure that you're completely on top of your security. With this has been, it has a tight relationship from a data governance perspective, with data protection and data governance perspective. They are using a similar way of labeling, and this is called the unified labeling system. And this is where it's moved to in the last couple of months or last year somewhere. It's kind of depending on how you look at it, from what's in preview and what's not. But it's a unified approach of classifying and labeling. Like it said, unified labeling, the whole wording is there, but it's separated out into 2 major pieces. So the one on the left, which is the sensitivity, and currently looking for my laser pointer. Here we go. The sensitivity piece. That's the one on the left. That's the one which we're going to discuss today. It's about information protection. It's about classifying. It's about protecting the documents. So it's about protection. That's or labeling and protection. Sorry, that's what I should point out to. And it's about what level of sensitivity is on the document. The other piece is the retention piece. That's really about records management. So we want to make sure that we're clear on the two concepts here. Sensitivity is about the document. What level is the document? What classification? Public, personal, public, internal data, classified, whatever applies to that one. That's the sensitivity piece. The retention piece is drawn towards how long should I retain a document? And that's the records management piece. How long should I retain it, or when am I not allowed? When must I delete a particular document? That's the retention piece on the right. So similar way of applying labeling, similar backend system to that extent, but two different areas, two different concepts. Both use the unified approach with discovery, classifying, and labeling, and both allow you to monitor, of course, but it's two different ways of looking at it. So key difference, keep that in mind. So where back in the day, or back in the days, it's still here, of course, but where were we and where are we moving towards? That's kind of the key question, because this is eventually Microsoft Information Protection is kind of an evolution. And I think that's what I really like about where Microsoft is currently bringing this, not only with information protection, but the whole security platform. You see it gets a lot of attention these days, and they're really working towards having a single platform, which is kind of unified across all devices, all apps, and it's one way forward that you completely control the whole stack. So we had Office Information Protection on the left. We had the Windows Information Protection, which was clearly aimed towards more of your local machine. Office 365 was clearly to the Office 365 stack. And we had the Azure Information Protection, which is on the right here. So three different pieces of information protection, which all address different ways of what should be protected, where it should be protected, and how it is protected. And you're clearly seeing here, oh, there we go, the Office 365 environment, the Intune environment, and the Azure Information Protection portal. So you have three portals where you're starting to manage, which is not helping out with having a one-way or unified way of looking at it. And this has been changed, of course, with now the proper way of looking at this is where Information Protection, Office 365, together with the Windows Information Protection, together with Azure Information Protection is becoming that going forward, one way, unified way of looking at it. And this is where the Microsoft 365 Security and Compliance Center start popping in. So to make it, to make it clear and easy, there's a security center and there's a compliance centers, but we're still in the transition to moving to those two different centers, because nowadays it's still the protection center, which kind of covers both angles. And towards the future, we're going to cover two separate admin centers in Office 365 or Microsoft 365, I should point out to, and that's the security center and the compliance center. So, and now it's being applied to all your devices from a centralized way of looking at it. And what we're basically doing is protecting your sensitive data, of course. That's the key thing here. That also means that we're getting into scenarios which allows us to say, hey, I got a document here. I've applied a classification label which says this document is highly sensitive. So the data in there should be protected. Now I'm opening up the Word document. I'm copying a particular piece out of the document to my clipboard. I'm moving to the Twitter app and I want to share out the data, which is of course not something you want, because if it's sensitive data, you don't want to share it out to the public via Twitter. And this is where you see the combination that's really strong with all the different angles, because this is where Windows Information Protection kicks in. Once you start to paste that particular piece of text out of that classified information or a classified document, you get a pop-up which is triggered by Windows Information Protection saying, hey, you are not allowed to paste that information into this app because it's sensitive information. And that's the power where Microsoft is currently moving towards, and how you can start controlling your data. It's not only about the physical document, it's about the text that's in there. It's about controlling if you share out the document in a Teams meeting, that the screen gets black at that point, It's not able to print the document because it's confidential, and all sorts of information. And to be fair, this even goes beyond, because Microsoft Cloud App Security, you might have heard of that one, also allows to add another layer of protection on top of it. This also is being applied to data loss prevention, of course, which is another solution within the Microsoft stack, where the sensitivity label starts driving particular business rules. That's the key thing here. So once the label is applied, you can say, you are not allowed to share this document out, or you are not allowed to do this, or this document shouldn't be there at that point. That's the business rules, all based on this label. So I hope you're still following me. I do this quite a lot for a large audience, but I'm not able to see you. So hopefully you're still there, you're still awake. I got one slide left, and then we'll basically move up to the demo piece. So a bit more technical, well, I wouldn't say too technical, but a key principle about the sensitivity label, which is it's a property, it's a metadata, it's an attribute, or whatever you want to refer to it, which becomes part of the actual document itself. And that's where the key thing pops up. It's something which is in the document and persistent. That means if it's persistent, it actually moves with the document independently where the document is being stored. So if I store the document in SharePoint Online, which is from a SharePoint perspective, and I'm an Office 365 guy and SharePoint guy for, based on my background, I would be storing my documents in SharePoint Online or in OneDrive, doesn't really matter. And that then the sensitivity label is part of the document. So it's part of SharePoint Online, basically. But now if I open up an email and I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to share that document as an attachment, not as a link, as an attachment to the email, and I'm going to share that out. The interesting piece is here, both the tag or the label is actually traveling with the email inside of the document. The other piece, which is key here, the protection which I apply to the document is also traveling with the document. And that's where it becomes interesting. So what's the biggest difference here? If I would apply the proper authorizations and the proper authentication in SharePoint Online, basically a lot of the companies would say, yeah, we got you covered because we have the proper security model in place. But if I take out a particular document out of the context of SharePoint Online, that whole security model is not applicable anymore. It's still in place, but I just pulled out the document, downloaded it to my local laptop, and now I'm free to share the document anywhere where I want. And I don't have any control more, and no control anymore. This changes with the sensitivity labels. This changes with information protection. Because I'm still able to download that document from SharePoint Online or OneDrive or wherever that's being stored. But if I download that document, the protection and the label is still part of the document. So if it's in my downloads folder in my local laptop, that protection is still applicable. And if I open up that document, I'm being validated whether I have the proper permissions or not at that point. That's the strongest part. So keep that in mind. Key principle, which we should be aware of. So the demo. What I'm going to do is I'm basically going to show you a couple of things. We're going to move around. We're going to move from the Office client, where we're going to start off with. I'm going to show you how the labels works in practice. And then we'll slowly move to the more small bits and pieces of the admin interface to give you some general ID. And then we'll move back to the slide deck and we'll basically wrap things up. I think that's where we're going to start off. And normally I say if you like that, if you have questions, but yeah, we'll get those at the end of the session. So no worries, we'll get to that later on. Here we go. So what we're seeing right now is I have a desktop open. Let me close this one. So I have a desktop Windows machine. I got Office installed on it. From a channels perspective, it doesn't really matter at this point, but from a channels perspective, I'm in the, what is it, the monthly targeted channel, or it has a new name recently, of course. But I'm logged in with the same tenant. And of course, there's an Office 365 tenant in the background. So what we're going to do is I'll start off or basically kick off my Word client. So the key thing is good to be aware of is that a lot of the information protection and maximized integration, let's put it that way, of optimized is targeted towards the Office clients. That doesn't mean that you can't apply a label to other files. So other files than Office is Outlook, is emails from the perspective, Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. But we can still apply labels also to PDFs, JPEGs, and other file types. It's not on a huge list, let's put it that way. It's the most common files which you want to protect from that perspective. And there's a particular document within the Microsoft Docs which outlines exactly what file types there are, which you can cover or not. I do want to refer to SDK, which they what is it? Which the information protection team or the information protection team basically for the group is sharing out as an SDK where you can use the labeling from your own application. So that allows you to build your own applications and start applying labels based on your own logic. And that also applies to Adobe, because what Adobe did with Acrobat Reader, they made it fully integrated with the with the Microsoft Information Protection set, which allows you to completely open up securely in PDF, all PDFs in Acrobat Reader. And when you start opening up the documents, it actually validates and checks whether you have the right permissions to the document. And that's the key thing here, of course. So Adobe is completely compliant with Microsoft Information Protection, which is a nice one. All the other documents, what happens is if you actually start protecting a JPEG file, I don't know actually if I have a JPEG file here. Let me see. Saved pictures. That's a bit empty. Nope, I don't have a JPEG file here. Camera roll is also empty, of course. Yes, it's a really clear machine. So a JPEG file normally what gets it changes the extension to JPEG with a P at the end, and that means it's being protected at that point, and that will start opening up the document in the specific information protection client. So that's a bit of a different behavior. I'll focus on the Office apps for today now. So if I just open up a blank document, and what you see as and what's different from the out-of-the-box experience is there's a bar, an information protection bar, which is shown here, and I have a sensitivity button within my ribbon, which basically shows all different labels already. So interestingly enough, this is actually not an out-of-the-box experience, because out of the box, if I still have it open, this is a different machine. Out of the box, the experience is like this. Here we go. The ribbon. And this is what you might have noticed already is since depending on in which update channel from Office you are, Office Pro Plus I am referring to, you got a sensitivity button. And that button potentially is completely grayed out. If you don't have any labels within your organization being published out to you, then that means this sensitivity button is grayed out. That's the out-of-the-box experience. So basically what the team, the information team, information protection team has been doing, they also made a unified labeling client, or Azure Information Protection Unified Labeling Client. That's a big word. It basically takes over from the out-of-the-box experience and adds a couple of additional features to it. So the general advice from the perspective is if you start rolling out Microsoft Information Protection, completely in the whole Azure Information Protection, as you can notice. If you roll out the Microsoft Information Protection within your company, also start deploying the Azure Information Protection Unified Labeling Client, because it allows you to control or do more. It's more feature rich from the perspective. What I guess what will happen is somewhere in the future, the Pro Plus out-of-the-box native experience will catch up with all the features. That's already happening, but they are not there yet. So right now, still, with regard to the Windows desktop client, this is where you want to go to. Referring to the desktop client, where is everything? That's already in a couple of slides further on. It's basically not only aimed towards the desktop client, of course. You also have mobile. in your mobile and on your tablets, also with all the apps on iOS and on Android. So meaning the Office app, which is kind of the key app nowadays, or the single apps or the independently apps on Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, all support the labeling. And the key app thing is what I'll show you in a bit is it's also nowadays being supported from the browser, and especially with protection. And I think it's still in preview because that's been changing, but still it's preview. But we can also, if we protect the documents, we can also open them in the browser, and that's a key thing. So I'll step back, kind of continuing and talking and talking and talking, going back to the basics here. What I've done, I've set up a couple of labels: personal, public, internal, confidential. I actually made a sub-labeling because you can add 2 levels of labeling here. Is confidential for all employees, and I made one explicitly for the leadership team. I made one secret, finance, personal identifiable information, and top secret, which is a bit of a test back in the days. The same ones are over here, so I'm still seeing that one. And if I would type a document, it basically I can say, hey, this is a public document. So now I apply to the public label. I can also change that one, going to secret, and now it's secret. Still doesn't really change a lot. So what I did do is, if I make it confidential, this is interesting because, and I'll stop here for a second, because you see some changes happening. I added visual markings. That's something you can control from the admin experience. What will happen is you can inject a header and a footer or a watermark. So that's visual markings. The key thing is that it becomes more visual in the document, and also if you start to printing, of course, or you publish out the document, that it's visual, that it's a particular sensitivity label at that point. The other key thing, what you do from an admin experience, is you set the labeling, and you control the name of the label, and you control the description. And this is what you're seeing right now. Let's see if I have a zoom it. Nope. Sorry about that, because then I would have been able to zoom it a bit more. What you see here is it's a large description, but it's key that you're actually going to describe what means confidential. So 1, make a description, make it really a clear description. You don't want to, you want to make sure that it's not being interpreted in the wrong way. Secondly, is provide a couple of examples of what you actually mean. So somewhere halfway the description, you see an example of what's being meant with this particular confidential label. If I click this one, the actual label is being applied, and now it's interesting because this is where it's going to say this document is marked as confidential data, and I have an actual confidential watermark here as well. So both header, maybe the footer, yeah, the footer too, and the watermark is now applied to the document, and that's being done by the document itself. So I can save this one out. So why don't I just save it in my OneDrive location? Let me add the date just to be sure that I don't have a duplicate. So there we go. And it's been saved out, and the document is in place. Interestingly enough, it says view permissions here, and that means is that the protection is also being applied. So that's the interesting piece here. I don't have to set the protection. No, the protection is being set for me, just by applying the label here. That's the interesting piece. So going to Office 365, and if I would log in with my OneDrive, what I'll actually see is the same document starts popping up, of course, or at least that's what we hope. Lorem ipsum was it? There we go. And I can open up that document. It opens up the Word Online editor. And what we'll see is, and this has been, oh, it's not there yet. Seems that I'm kind of missing some piece. So sorry, I was clicking that way too much, of course. So let me go back. So what happened? Well, it actually said, hey, your document is being protected at this point. I thought I wanted that setting turned on, but sadly that's not the case. But it's being protected, and I'm not able to open up that document in the Office Online applications. So what you need to do is, if you want to open up this document, since it's not compatible yet, you need to edit this in the desktop app. I thought I had it enabled already because I wanted to show you basically how that would look like if you protect the document, but sorry about that. So what I'll do as an alternative, I'll open up a normal document. And it actually shows, and this is one of the out-of-the-box Office, of one of the demo documents which are there. You see the Office Online, of course, and if it should be adding, here we go, these sensitivity labels as well. So this is where you see that when you start moving from the previous Azure Information Protection, you migrate over, because that's an explicit step. You need to migrate over to unified labeling. Once you do that, all the labels become available here in the web interface as well. And what I can do here is I can apply a label and set it to internal. So it's not that explicitly, but in the bottom here, you actually see that the internal is being applied. If I would change it to public, you see that this changes to public too. That means it also changes. And let's see if I change it to all employees, it should probably block at this point. It's always interesting if you do that during an online session. No, funny. It does say that it's being protected there here. So this is the same label which I just applied in the desktop interface. So something seems to be not working completely. So because this is what I expected, just opening it up and it actually starts applying the label. I am missing at this point the header and the footer, of course. So it's not completely there. But so moving forward, how am I setting this up? So I already opened up the security admin center. So this has been changed from what was back, still is applicable for a lot of the situations, is you have the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center that has the URL protection.office.com, but that will, moving forward, that will change to security.microsoft.com. And this is where you can find sensitivity labels under classification. And if I move here, I can basically start administrating the different labels which are there. Here you see the same hierarchy tree, which we also see in the different clients from the perspective. And I can change and update the labels. And what I'll do is, let me open up the secret. And I can do edit, of course. This is the right one. Nope. Yeah, let's pick this one. Here we go. So, and it's editing or creating new ones is exactly the same steps, but basically this is where you set the display name. So that's the actual label name shown in all the different clients. The description, which I was already referring to. So make it clear, make it explicit, and provide some samples in there. And potentially another description for admin. So that's more from an administration point of view. Clicking next. This is where you can start applying the encryption, either apply it or remove it or completely disable it from the perspective. So since this is the confidential level, we as a company have chosen that we want to apply the encryption. You want to assign permissions. That's basically where I want to get to. So you can make sure that if you apply the label that you're going to set the authorization, meaning assigning permissions. And under here, or basically below here, you can actually set the users and the groups. So that means is if I apply this particular label, confidential all employees, that means is I'm making sure that only the people within this company, and that's my tenant, have the permissions as reviewer. That means everybody outside of this particular domain is not allowed to access the document. And this is where you start controlling the whole piece around. If I send out information to somebody which shouldn't get that information, this is where it is getting blocked, because that protection travels with the document. And once a document is being opened, so even though that physically the document is on a machine of your, let's say your hacker at that point, let's make it really clear. Physically, the document can be on that machine, but if the hacker opens up the document, it still gets challenged because you need to be authenticated as a user, which is part of this particular tenant domain from that perspective. So this is where you set that up. You can also change the permissions. You can change it to only view, and you can make it completely custom from the perspective, and change it to the fact that you can't share it out, you can't share it with a screen share, you can't print it, or additional pieces there and there. And some additional steps with regards to how long somebody has access, or when that access should actually expire. This is where you set the content marking, what we just shown, the text which was in there, the watermark, confidential. This document is marked as confidential data, the header and the footer. And you can change this a bit. So you can change the text, of course, but you can change the font size, the coloring, and the alignment of the text. So that's being applied to all the different clients, Office clients. And this is a rather new option in here. It's the site and the group settings. If I turn that on, that means if I'm going to apply a label not only to the document, and this is where the key thing is changing, if I'm going to apply this document to an Office 365 group or SharePoint site. So that's where this is changing nowadays. From first, it was completely targeted towards documents. Now it's been changing, or basically it's been expanding. That's a better word for it. It's changing from the document level to groups and SharePoint sites, and actually to Microsoft Teams as well, because eventually a Microsoft Teams is actually an Office 365 group. So this is, if I open it up, I can start defining the behavior of that particular group or SharePoint site. I can say, hey, that group is something which is not by which you can't choose, but this is by default set to the fact it's a public group, or it's maybe a private group, or none at that point, and completely let control to the actual user. So since this is highly confidential, let's make this one private. That also means potentially, if it's highly confidential, you potentially don't want to let external users have access. That means normally you would need to do that from an admin center, SharePoint admin center, for instance, or now we can start controlling this on the level of the sensitivity, which allows you basically allow users to make a particular choice of what sensitivity level, or what levels there are, and let the user choose the proper level, or you control it. And by choosing that level, that sensitivity level, actually a label, you start determining what access permissions there are, what authorizations there are, or how you want to control if external users are being allowed. So I won't check that box. And I'm going to do something else as well. When you enroll Intune and you're going to enroll your devices in Intune, you have managed devices and unmanaged devices. And unmanaged devices are by default devices which are not enrolled. Since it's not managed, you don't control that device. You don't control where that data is being stored. So you probably want to do, and especially with highly confidential data, secret data, or basically the 5 to 10% potentially, you want to either say, hey, don't allow full access, but slowly start limiting that access. So I'm going to basically disable a couple of features for users. And I'm only going to allow web-only access. That means people can't download the documents anymore. People have web access and they can use the full Office Online suite, so they can be productive, but it's in a limited fashion. Or I can say, hey, this is potentially secret level. I completely want to block access because you can only access documents which have the secret level, or not documents, but sites or groups which have the secret level applied to it. Then you should have a managed device at that point. So this is definitely an interesting feature. It's still in preview, to be clear on that one. But yeah, it will GA somewhere, I guess, later this year. But it's really powerful from that perspective. Moving forward, the last piece is the auto labeling for Office apps. So this is somewhere, or this is basically applicable when you actually type a document. And when you type a document in Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, and you would write, or you would add, in this case, the Dutch citizen service number in the document, then the Word the Office app starts recommending, or going to push it, make it mandatory to apply a particular label. And the mandatory or recommendation is set here. But it basically means is as the text here says, we found a Dutch or Netherlands citizen service number in the document that makes this a confidential document. So you want to make sure that if you have a particular set of wording in the documents, that these documents are set to a particular sensitivity level. And this is where you control this piece. This is when you actually are authoring a document. The other piece which is in here, and that's coming, is also when we can start controlling documents at rest, meaning all the documents which are there in Office 365, which are already been there for maybe a very long time. You can start scanning those documents and start applying similar rule sets like these, business rule sets like these, and actually start applying a sensitivity label based on the content of the document. Really powerful. Last step, just submitting the whole label, and we're updating everything, of course. So now we have a label in place, and I've been doing this for all the other labels too. And the last step would be publishing out with a policy. That means is I can start selecting, I can actually select this one or publish a label. That means is I'm going to push out personal label, or I can say, hey, I don't want to push out personal, but I want to push out or publish labels, more labels like this. I'm going to make a set to it. I'm going to do add. I'm going to say next. And this is interesting because now I can start choosing who I want to publish this out to. So why is this interesting? From a business perspective, if I would be in the finance department, I would probably control sensitive data because finance data is by default always, or most of the time, sensitive data. But finance is only interesting for actually the finance people. So me working in the factory and working on documents, I don't need to apply a finance label maybe to a document. So now what I can do is I can change who I obviously target, who I publish the labels to. And I can say finance, oh, sorry, that's not here. Do add, and then say finance. There we go, finance team. And I can actually push out just the labels to the finance team. Which is interesting because now I can start targeting these labels to different sets of people depending on who needs what label settings of labels. And I can start applying a particular sets of policies. So is there a particular default label which always need to be applied? If I would change from a higher to a lower classification, do I need to provide a justification? So that's interesting. So if I change from highly confidential all the way down to public, I probably want to put in a justification and making sure that this is due to blah, 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 or I made a mistake or whatever. So a couple of settings you can put in. I'll just cancel this one for now. And you can apply multiple policies targeting potentially different people as well. So what I just talked about as well is the auto labeling, which is a preview. And this is applicable to targeting data at rest. That means is applying sensitivity labels to data at rest from a scanning perspective. So interesting, upcoming. This is also where people are going to use or Microsoft is bringing in artificial intelligence in actually the sensitivity labels. That means is based on a learning mechanism and learning your content, what are actually classified documents and trainable classifiers. That's the formal wording which they use. And based on trainable classifiers, you can start indexing your content. Something which I'm going to present a bit later on this year, and I'm currently trying to get my head around it. But interesting next step, and especially with large amount of data, this becomes really interesting to kind of use artificial intelligence to determine what's in there, what's in the document, and how do I start applying a particular label on top of it. So going back to the slides. We got somewhere 10 minutes left, so we're going to move to the wrap up. Something which is important, I already mentioned it. This is the, you want to start migrating. If you already have information protection in place, then it's key to start migrating to the Microsoft Information Protection. So from Azure Information Protection, Microsoft Information Protection, that starts migrating your labels to the Microsoft Information Protection space. If you're not migrated yet, you will see this. And basically, if you start clicking on that, you will see the note here on the top, and it says, please migrate over. It's important, of course. And in the Azure Information Protection, in the Azure portal, underneath the Azure Information Protection blade, you need to start activating this. And it says unified labeling not activated. Basically, you want to activate this. One key thing is, if you have already labels in Office 365 Unified Labeling or Microsoft 365 Unified Labeling with the same name as in Azure Information Protection, they will conflict. So make sure you check that before you activate this one, and then you move over. The other thing which is key here is you want to make sure that you've deployed the Azure Information Protection Unified Labeling client, not the Azure Information Protection Classic client from the perspective. So just a couple of remarks. But I guess most of you will be on the new Microsoft Information Protection space within the new Compliance and Security Center, which is the place where you want to be nowadays. I mentioned already, today was targeted towards the Windows platform, of course, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook. I haven't touched really shown it, but it's similar in concept. It doesn't really matter. It's available from 1910 plus out of the box, but basically install the Unified Labeling client and you got it everywhere. And it's also not depending on just the Pro Plus version. So if you are using Office 2016 or 2013, if you install that Unified Labeling client, you're also up and running for the for information protection. It's supported on the Mac, iOS, Android, web. Basically, everything is there already, and it's all over your platform, and that's a really nice thing. This is a slide from Ignite last year, so that's been a bit more than a half year ago. Interestingly, is they are delivering what they promised. Basically, we're almost at the end of H1. I think most of it is in there. Auto classification, the piece which is under here. That's what I mentioned with the preview right now. That's interesting. The sunset. That's definitely something which is key here, and that's basically the next slide. Is right now they made back in March there was the formal messaging was out, and they're targeting the sunset of the Azure Information Protection Classic client, and the same one which I mentioned just before, and that's March 31 of next calendar year. This is why you want to start moving. Or migrating over if you're on Azure Information Protection. Most of the features are there in the Microsoft Information Protection space. So the reasons to kind of stay in Azure Information Protection is becoming less and less and less. And it's clearly deprecated technology at this point. There's some small pieces are left. So still figure it out. If you've been using information protection for a long time already in Azure Information Protection, check it out, what's being supported and what's not being supported. But otherwise, at least start planning in your roadmap from that perspective. And then with Microsoft Information Protection, the unified labeling piece, it's everywhere. It's all the pieces are there on all different clients, on all different devices. And that's the key thing why you want to move also there. So a couple of resources. If you want to enable sensitivity labels in Office files and SharePoint and OneDrive, basically what I've shown you in the Office web, Office Online, sorry, I mean, check out that document. If you want to use it for Teams, Office 365 Group and SharePoint, the public preview, I touched on that one. There's the document with more information and all the file types, which I was referring to with regards to it's not only the Office files, but more than that. This is the link to the particular Microsoft Docs article. Completely different topic, but I'm also the owner of the Microsoft Client Browser, the SharePoint Client Browser. It's a community tool, it's free for use. It basically is interesting if you want to gain insights into your SharePoint site and you're doing some development stuff or some IT Pro stuff around it, or even from a citizen development perspective. And you want to know some more in-depth information, this is the tool to use. It's been around for since 2013, so it's been around for a very long time already. It's pretty much heavily being used in each month still. So yeah, interesting to see. The link is on the bottom, and enjoy, of course. And let me know if you like it, and if you have feedback, let me also know. And then for now, thank you very much for this webinar. If you want to contact me, these are my contact details. I'm on Twitter, email, of course. WordPress is my blog. And I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. See you next time. And I guess we're getting into some Q&A if we still have some time left, Shane.
Yeah, thanks for a great presentation, Bram. Yes, and now we will start the questions and answers part. And should you wish to ask a question, type it into the questions window now. Okay, we have some questions in, Bram, so I'll give you this one first. Let's see, my question is, we still maintain authority with on-premise AD, but we sync with Azure AD. What do you need to consider and plan for if we decide to move authority to Azure AD? How does that impact on-premise services like SharePoint on-premise, Dynamics SL on-premise, and simple stuff like printing services on-premises? Big
That's
question.
a big question.
We start with the easy one.
Yeah, well, no worries. So if I understand correctly, because there's a couple of pieces here, you basically went from an on-premise, like most of the customers, you went from an on-premises environment, which still is active, and you kind of added the cloud to it, and you set up your Azure AD Connect. That means you're going to sync out all of your user accounts to the cloud, and that means you have an identity on both ends, and you're basically, if you do it, if you set up everything right, you have single sign-on in place. That means what we're going to do is next is the key component which kind of brings the labels to the user is actually the unified labeling client, or what's being provided by the Pro Plus client, the Office Pro Plus client out of the box. That particular piece is actually connecting to the Azure services, or actually the Microsoft Information Protection services, I should refer to. That's a cloud service. Because you're logging into your Office client and you're actually logging in with the unified labeling client with your online identity, meaning because it's being synchronized, it's still the same identity. It will start retrieving the right labels to the client, and it actually shows you the right labels at that point. So because Microsoft does a great job on integration on all the different services, you're basically being settled and you should be in the right place at that point. Okay. I hope that answers the question.
Great. And then another question. Yeah, let's see, one more question. In terms of info protection, should we consider this together with end people protection or as separate systems? We're a small non-profit, but our staff travel globally, sometimes with sensitive data. Should we try to find a system service that does both, or is it better, safer to do this in separate systems or services?
If I understand the question right, the key question what you're asking is how should we look at security as a bigger plan somewhere from that perspective. I think you're with Microsoft, the security platform, basically the first slide which I started off with, it's everything is integrated. They provide a whole stack at security solutions where information protection is only a part of that whole perspective. And it's also covering a particular piece of a particular need, basically, which is really about how do I control data, and if data travels outside of what I'm in control of. That was the initial, the fear of most of the security officers and CIOs of these today. With Microsoft and Microsoft Information Protection, you're covered on that area, but you're also covered from the perspective if you're looking at more threat protection, so viruses, spams, and stuff like that, or risky users, which is an interesting one. If you would actually travel a lot, that's fine. But being in China and being in the Netherlands at the same time, that's kind of impossible, of course. So making sure that you're covered and that you're secure from that angle, that's also there in Azure, in the security platform in general. It's different features, different services, but everything is being covered from that perspective.
Okay, here's an interesting question. Bram, you were explaining that the user can be blocked to copy content from a document to Twitter, but can we also block the user from taking screenshots? Otherwise, the content can still be shared.
Yeah, it's so the screenshot which you're referring to is, oh, forgot to turn that off. So the screenshot, blocking screenshot feature is in there. That's being covered in information protection as well. So that means it's one of the custom permissions. When I went to the wizard of editing the label, we got to the encryption section, let's call it that way. And I could say I'm applying protection, and underneath there was the option to assign users. And it had on the right, it says reviewer at that point. There was a predefined role. And actually underneath the reviewer role, there's a couple of permissions. And in there is also the permission to block screen capturing.
Brilliant. Bram, we're pretty much out of time, so I'm going to leave it at that. You had your details on screen there, so if anybody needs to reach out, they can do so.
Thank you. Thank
Brilliant.
you very much.
Thank you, Bram. Okay, everybody, just bear with me here for one moment. This is the end of the webinar today. Please see sharepointeurope.com for further details on all upcoming webinars, or visit our resource center for all previous episodes. A big thank you again to Bram for joining us today, and thank you all too. Take care and goodbye.